What's up, party people? This is Chuck, aka Basiclandshark from over on Twitch.tv. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about probably the best mid-range deck in the format right now. Mid-range, if you count 2-drops, Tarmogoyf and Scourge of the Skyclaves as mid-range threats. Death Shadow, Jund Death Shadow. So how does this deck operate, and how do you beat this deck? Essentially, you want to start your first turn with something like a Thoughtseize or an Inquisition of Kozolex. Take your opponent's best threat or best removal spell away from them and sort of control the game from there with cards like Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt, while putting out a threat like Hexdrinker, Tarmogoyf, or Scourge of the Skyclaves, or Death Shadow in the late game can come down as something like a 4/4 to a 7/7. That's kind of the sweet spot, right when you're in that that 9 to 7 life total range. So Team or Battle Rage is how you force through damage. It's best with something like Scourge of the Skyclaves or Death Shadow, but you can use that on a Tarmogoyf in a pinch. Dismember, a nice easy way to lose life. Obviously, Fatal Push, one of the best removal spells in the format right now, with Prowess being everywhere. This particular build runs a few one-ofs in the form of Grim Lavamancer and Dark Confidant, which can both help you lose life in a pinch if you need to grow your shadows a little bit more, which is kind of nice. You can do that also with things like Seal of Fire or Lightning Bolt if you need to. The 3 copies of Hexdrinker, some decks run Knight of the Ebon Legion in this spot or Monastery Swiftspear in this spot, but Hexdrinker is one of the better threats at taking over the late game because it can scale so good with what point in the game that you're at. It's pretty good early, it's pretty good in the late game, so that hits 2 of the rubrics that you would want to value a card by to determine how good it's going to be in a deck. And I think that's why this one gets the nod here. 20 lands. This is a little bit mana hungry version of the deck. Some shadow builds run 19, or I've seen as few as 18 lands because you have the cantrips and Mishra's Bauble. This is running 2 copies of Nurturing Peatland for the additional way to draw off of the land, which is good. And moving on to the sideboard, Veil of Summer for those ever important control matchups, and also bring this in versus some attrition decks to protect against targeted discard. Soul Guide Lantern for the graveyard builds in the format. Tend the Pest. I think this comes in the mirror, so you can blank removal. It's really good to cast this in response to something like a Fatal Push on a Death Shadow or a Scourge, and just get a ton of 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens. So I assume that's the reason why this is in the deck. Assassin's Trophy, this comes in against things like Tron and decks with a lot of Planeswalkers. So it just is the most versatile removal spell in the format and comes at the low cost of giving your opponent 1 land, which is not the best in all situations because a lot of decks can punish you for giving you a land or giving them a land, but Assassin's Trophy still hits everything in the format, so good to have access to. Kroxa, this is something that you bring in those mid-range mirrors. I would bring this in the Death Shadow mirror for sure, or against Boomer Jund for sure. The Lurrus control decks, you want to bring this in as well because it's a good card there. Anytime you can rebuy your threats from the graveyard without Lurrus, you're doing something right with this deck. Liliana's Triumph. This is a great way to beat Boggles, which is not that very popular, but also can work as a removal spell in a pinch. If your opponent is a threat light deck, they're relying on 1 threat like a Primeval Titan to win the game. Liliana's Triumph at 2 mana is a good way to get the job done. Kolaghan's Command, this is sort of our nod to Hammer Time being a deck, and also deals with troublesome permanents like Ensnaring Bridge. Instant speed discard spell, can deal the 2 final points of damage to the opponent. This card is very versatile as well, similar to Assassin's Trophy, never dead. Lurrus of the Dream Den, I think Jund Shadow is I think it's the best Lurrus deck in the format. Hammer Time coming in close second, but I think Jund Shadow is the best Lurrus deck in the format. Kozolex Return, this is a way to get rid of Ariok Champion, as well as a bunch of smaller threats. So if your opponent's running a tribal deck like Elves or Merfolk, Sweepers can come in handy there. Being that it is a devoid spell, it can get rid of Ariok Champion even though it has protection from red, so that's one of the best boons to running this card over other sweepers like Anger the Gods, which would cost double red. So you kind of get the idea why this card sees play. But anyways, that's a little bit on Jund Death Shadow and how the deck operates. So how does this deck lose? Any deck that can sit on its... Any deck that can kind of rest on its laurels and let us deal damage to ourselves and then deal a bunch of splash damage all at once, that can be a good way to lose the game. So I'm thinking Burn here. Burn can just hold their spells, make us do a lot of the work, and then finish us off with the final 9 points of damage by holding 3 1-mana burn spells or something like that. This deck doesn't really match up that well versus big mana decks like Amulet Titan and Tron. Tron not dealing a bunch of damage to itself during the course of a normal game makes Scourge of the Skyclaves pretty bad, so it can be a little clunky there in that matchup. Also, I guess this deck would struggle against any deck with Chalice of the Void because we do have 24 1-drops. So Chalice on 1 can really shut this deck down pretty well. We would depend on Kolaghan's Command or Assassin's Trophy to remove that card, but that's 3 out of 60 cards. We still have to draw them. So those are just a few of the things that would slow this down. Engineered Explosives on 1 for the same reason removes a huge chunk of our threats. Hex Drinker, Death Shadow, and Grim Lavamancer, all 1-drops. Engineered Explosives on 2, or even Blast Zone to the same effect. Engineered Explosives and Blast Zone kind of do a similar thing. Can be a pain in the butt for this deck. So those are some of the cards that you would bring in if you want to beat Jund Death Shadow. Other than that, just playing something like a big mana matchup or a big mana deck would be the way to go if you're wanting to beat this deck. So those are my thoughts on Jund Shadow. Just as an aside, Modern Horizons 2 comes out in a couple of weeks and the format is about to get turned on its head. So just taking some time to revisit these strategies to serve as sort of a time capsule. What was good in the format at the end of May in 2021. So yeah, I think this deck might change a little bit with the new printings. We'll have to see where it goes. I'll revisit the strategy sometime after the new set comes out and see what changes have been made. But yeah, if you like this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Go ahead and get yourself subscribed. I'll try and do at least a video every week if I can. I think I can do that. But yeah, this is going to be Chuck, aka Basiclandshark, signing off for now. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and take care. Peace.